The salt barrel method was not a folk trick, it was a logistics system. For centuries, European armies, militias, and traveling war bands relied on a preservation method that did not fail when winter froze supply lines or summer rot set in. The salt barrel method was not about flavor or convenience, it was about certainty. When men marched for weeks across contested land, meat had to survive heat, cold, damp wagons, and delays. Freezers were not replaced by salt. Salt was the technology. What follows is not romantic nostalgia. This is the actual process used across Central, Northern, and Eastern Europe to preserve meat for months, sometimes longer, with consistency. If you understand this system, you understand how armies moved, how sieges were supplied, and how civilian populations endured war without fresh food. The meat selection determined whether the barrel would last or fail. European war provisioning manuals and estate records show a consistent preference for pork and beef, with pork favored for long storage due to its fat stability under salt. So, in practical terms today, what this really means is, if someone tries this method with supermarket-aged meat, the timeline shortens dramatically. The original method, you see, assumed same-day slaughter. That difference alone explains why, well, so many modern attempts end up failing. The salt itself, folks, was chosen and prepared with real intention. Not all salt worked, that's for sure. Fine salt clumped, dissolved unevenly, and just failed to draw out moisture consistently. Coarse sea salt or mined rock salt was the standard. In German and Baltic regions, gray salt rich in minerals was common, while in alpine regions, white rock salt dominated. The key was always crystal size and dryness. Salt was often dried before use by spreading it near hearths or up in lofts. Moist salt, well, that introduced water into the barrel, which was just not acceptable. In some regions, salt was lightly mixed with crushed juniper, bay, or coriander, not for flavor, but for mild antimicrobial properties and to keep insects at bay. For modern application, the takeaway is simple: coarse, dry salt only. No iodized salt, no fine table salt. Moisture, folks, is the enemy. The barrel, believe it or not, was just as important as the meat. Barrels were never neutral containers. Oak was preferred, not for taste, but because its tight grain limited leakage while still allowing a little gas exchange. New barrels were rarely used. Fresh wood leached tannins and warped under salt, so most barrels had already carried wine, beer, or vinegar. Before use, barrels were scalded with boiling water and sometimes even lightly smoked. This killed surface microbes and sealed seams. The interior was then cooled and dried completely. Now, a modern container without breathability, well, it behaves differently. Plastic traps moisture, glass doesn't flex. Historically, barrels worked because they balanced containment and airflow. Anyone adapting this today really has to account for that difference. The layering process followed a strict order. Salt was never sprinkled casually. A thick base layer went down first, heavy enough that no wood showed through. Meat was then packed tightly, skinned side down where possible, with no air gaps. Every surface was rubbed with salt before placement. Each layer of meat was fully buried under salt before the next layer was added. No part of the meat touched another piece without salt between them. The final layer was always salt, forming a sealed cap. The barrel was then sealed but not airtight. Lids were weighted, not nailed. As moisture drew out of the meat, brine formed naturally. This brine was expected. If it did not appear within days, something had gone wrong. For practical use today, this means resisting the urge to drain liquid. That liquid is part of the preservation system. Barrels were stored cool, dark, and stable. Cellars, earth pits, stone outbuildings, or north-facing rooms were standard. Temperature swings were minimized. Freezing did not ruin the meat, but repeated freeze-thaw cycles did. Barrels were checked regularly, not opened, but inspected for leaks, mold on the exterior, or unusual odors escaping the seams. A properly salted barrel smelled clean, sharp, and mineral. Rot had a sweetness to it that experienced quartermasters recognized immediately. In wartime, barrels traveled on wagons, ships, and sleds. The method survived movement because salt equalized conditions inside the barrel. This is why it worked when drying or smoking alone could not. Meat was never removed casually. When needed, the barrel was opened briefly, a piece extracted, and the salt surface leveled again. Exposure time mattered. The less air introduced, the longer the barrel lasted. Before cooking, meat was soaked in cold water for hours or days, depending on thickness. Water was changed repeatedly. This step was essential and universally practiced. Failure to desalinate properly led to illness and dehydration. This detail matters for modern survivalists. Salted meat is not eaten as is. It is a preserved base, not a finished product. Records from the 30 Years' War, Northern Crusades, and Napoleonic supply trains confirm that salt barrels allowed armies to detach from local foraging. This reduced civilian hostility and sped movement. Civilians used the same method during wartime shortages. Barrels buried in cellars or hidden in barns provided protein through months of instability. This was not luxury food, it was survival food that worked. For historians, this method clarifies how armies operated beyond what maps and battle reports show. For survivalists, it offers a low-tech, power-independent preservation system proven under stress. A modern adaptation using fresh meat, coarse salt, and a cool storage space can preserve food through grid failure or supply disruption. The principles remain unchanged. Control moisture, eliminate air pockets, maintain temperature stability, respect time. This is not a weekend experiment. It is a system that rewards patience and precision. Drying failed in damp climates. Smoking required constant fuel. Pickling altered texture and nutrition. Salt barrels worked anywhere salt could be sourced. That reliability made it indispensable across Europe for centuries. When refrigeration arrived, the knowledge faded, not because it stopped working, but because convenience replaced resilience. If you understand the salt barrel method, you understand how people endured war, winter, and uncertainty with discipline and foresight. If this guide added value to your understanding of historical logistics and survival practice, subscribe to Warpaths of Europe, share this with others who care about real history, and keep this knowledge alive where it belongs.